Hello, and welcome to Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro, a podcast all about the Bible, theology, and all things related to the Christian faith. I'm the Ryan half of Ryan and Brian, and this is episode number 9. Brian and I are welcoming our first guest to the Bistro today, Mark Ziese. Mark is a man of many talents. Mark has been a professor for many years and is finishing his final year of teaching at Johnson University in Knoxville, Tennessee. He has participated in archaeological digs and frequently leads trips through Israel-Palestine. This upcoming episode with Mark is more like an introduction as we get to hear from him about the work he has done and what has been meaningful to him about his work. We will have more with Mark in later episodes. If you missed last week's episode, Brian and I talked about our trips to Israel-Palestine and our experiences, but also talked about a couple biblical passages and how archaeological work that is taking place today helps to inform us about the narratives in Scripture. If you missed that episode, stop what you're doing, stop right now, and go back and take a listen. If you did listen, Mark continues that thought as he talks about what biblical archaeology is and that the context of the find is important to its understanding. We know this episode and last have been a little bit of a departure from what we started doing at the beginning, but all this will lead us to next week's episode talking about worldview, and then onto more exploration of the temple conversation and the church's mission we started in John 14. It's kind of a long and winding road, but one that is definitely worth the travel. We hope you will journey with us on this thought. If you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a review with Apple Podcasts and share our Facebook or Instagram posts. We would love to share this content with as many people as possible. With all that said, let's jump in and hear from Bible Land Explorer, Mark Ziese.
Well, welcome back to the Bible Bistro.
Yes, welcome back.
How are you doing, Ryan?
I'm well.
Good.
Yourself?
I'm doing good. We think the Bible Bistro is a very special place, right?
Yeah. Well, yes. I keep coming back. I can't resist.
And we don't just let anybody in.
We've got a bouncer at the door.
But we have a friend today, and I am very thrilled that he's here. Mark Ziese is here with us today, and Mark, welcome to the Bistro.
Yes, welcome, Mark.
Thank you. I just learned there were no snacks.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's good kind to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's kind of a bring your own snack bistro. So sorry about that. But let me introduce who Mark is. We archaeology is one of the topics we've talked about on the podcast to this point. I had a professor once tell me, in fact, it's a friend of both of ours, Mark. John told me one time, said, there's two ways of doing archaeology. There's the guys who go and dig in the dirt and do the actual work. And then there are the guys who sit back and read about it and make decisions about it and that kind of thing. The thing I like about you, Mark, is you've done both of those things, right? You both have analyzed them and you've also done the actual digging. So Mark was a professor of mine when I was in seminary. And I've said this before, one of his classes had a huge impact on me. Intertestamental history and literature really changed the way I think about and read the Bible, and really appreciative for that. And Mark is now the professor at a professor of Old Testament at Johnson University, but his title is the Dean of the College of Bible and Theology. I should have listened to when you said that earlier.
The School of Bible and Theology.
The School of Bible and Theology, the Dean of the School of Bible and Theology. I apologize. And then he also leads trips to the Holy Land, and he does that under the auspices of the Jerusalem Center for Biblical Studies, which is a good thing. I've actually, when I have been to the Holy Land, Mark's been the leader of my trips, and that's been a really cool thing too. Most of all, though, I consider Mark a friend, and I appreciate him very much for that. So, Mark, I'm pleased that you're here with us today.
Oh, thank you, Brian. It's great to be here.
Okay, so let me ask you a couple of questions. So how did you get involved in archaeology to begin with? How did you start doing this stuff, and what are some of the things that you've done in connection with archaeology in the Holy Land?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I envisioned a career in archaeology when I was a wee lad. I don't know, way back when I was a kid. I thought, that is something I'd like to try. Went to college, and in the midst of my college experience, one of my professors actually went over to Israel-Palestine in a dig. I went with him, And we spent the summer in the dirt. And I said, yeah, this is what I want to do. And then I had to figure out how to actually make that happen because archaeology is actually not a vocation that one can do for a living.
Right.
Most archaeologists have patrons or deep pockets or something because So I ended up teaching and pursued the academic side of this and ended up in a university, college, seminary setting where I can teach for most of the months of the year and do archaeology on the side.
Cool. Very cool. So where did you dig that first time?
That very first time, I dug it's a tiny site just outside of the capital of Palestine, known as Ramallah. And it was a small site that was being touted as a possibility for the biblical site of Ai, or Ai, that's discussed in the book of Joshua.
Right.
We didn't know at the time if this was the Ai or could be the Ai. The site that is usually identified as Ai is a problem because it doesn't actually have anything there from the period of time that we usually associate with the time of Joshua. Okay. So a lot of people were saying, well, Joshua is just a myth. It didn't happen.
Right.
How do we know it didn't happen? Well, because it's, Ai is not inhabited in that time. Well, what if the site that everybody's saying is Ai is the wrong site?
Okay.
So we were exploring that question.
Okay. That's great. Yeah. So, and what was it about, you said that you did that and you said, this is for me. What was it about doing it that really caught you, I guess?
Well, I'm sort of an outside guy. I'd rather be outside than inside to start with. And I'd rather be working with my hands than working with my brain. That's probably the other part of it.
Try to bring those together, I think.
Yeah. Archaeology is described in all kinds of ways.
Right.
Oddly enough, some say it's sort of like being a librarian outside. Unlike the Hollywood images of the archaeologist, it's a lot of paperwork and a lot of careful recording of things.
Okay.
And so you got binders under your arm and you're drawing pictures and illustrating and describing and doing all that in a foreign country. And I found it to be exciting.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
What are some other places that you've dug then? How's your career gone from then?
Yeah, that was my first shot at it. After that, I went to seminary, and one of the reasons I went to seminary was to actually do excavation work with the professor that was there. And we went over to the country of Jordan. Okay. So I worked in Jordan for a season, jumped back, worked in Israel for another season, went back to Jordan and spent the next 10, 15 years working in Jordan. So most of my work has been in Jordan, back and forth between Israel and Jordan. Okay. My last season was about, 7 or 8 years ago. And we finished up the project. The team was looking to move on, and they decided to shift their attention to Sicily, which would be fun. They got great food in Sicily, incidentally. But I said, I don't know anything about Sicily. Okay. So I think I'm going to stick with Israel-Palestine. And that's when I made the shift. As you mentioned earlier in your talk, your prologue there, talking about archaeology or practicing archaeology.
Yeah.
I made the shift to talking about archaeology.
Right.
So that's what I do with these tours and things.
Sure. Yeah. And it's great to have someone who's so knowledgeable about it. It's not just somebody who's read about it, but somebody who's been there and done it. It's a different kind of experience. So, well, I wonder, Mark, could you give us kind of an overview when we think about biblical archaeology? What are you trying to do with biblical archaeology, or give us kind of for people who aren't maybe experts in this, or just to have an interest in it? How would you describe what happens with biblical archaeology?
Well, biblical archaeology has a long story. We can't tell it all here,
right?
But certainly, it's not digging in the ground with the Bible.
Right.
We use trowels and tools, but there is a weird kind of truth in that. Biblical archaeology at its heart is not different than any other kind of archaeology. It's not different than South American archaeology or North American archaeology or European archaeology. Everybody uses the same tools, the same techniques. We're driven, by the same science. But what sets biblical archaeology apart, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others, is the fact that what we're trying to do is understand the Bible better. So it's archaeology that's pursued in the interest of biblical studies,
Okay.
which makes it kind of special. In that to do it well, you need to have some experience with dirt and trowels and shovels, but you also need to know a little bit of something about the text,
Okay.
the languages, the theology, perhaps. So it's sort of an interdisciplinary pursuit.
Kind of the focus of biblical archaeology then is the kind of the cultures that are talked about in the Bible or that produce the Bible, these kind of things. Is that part of it? And
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There was a guy many, many years ago. He was actually an Egyptologist, Kenneth Kitchen, very famous guy, who talks about biblical archaeology as having specific aims. One of the aims of biblical archaeology is to illuminate, the biblical stories, or to illustrate the biblical stories.
Okay.
Or at best, and of course this is a hard rung on the ladder to reach, but to confirm the biblical account.
And that's what some people think that's what it's all about. Oh, we need to find this thing or that thing, but a lot of it, you're saying the majority of it really is more some of these other things to illustrate or illuminate and that kind of thing.
Yeah, you're really hitting the nail on the head there. Biblical archaeology has fallen on hard times.
Okay.
I think part of it is because of some, sincere but maybe misguided folk out there that they're trying to use archaeology as a weapon, as a way to prove, that the Bible is true in every way.
Right.
While I wouldn't disagree with that, at least in principle, I think that proof is an awfully hard thing to come to.
Right.
And when it comes to pots, and when it comes to houses, and when it comes to most of the things that we find on an archaeological site, these things don't have voices of their own. They require interpretation. So to say that this proves that that's a tall order.
It reminds me a little of what you said about that, people are saying, it's almost like an absence of evidence was proof in a way that they were trying to use, to prove something from a negative, basically. So, well, interesting. Ryan, do you have anything you want to jump in?
This is all fascinating. I told him as we were recording this, I'm just the dummy that's kind of in the corner for this one. You've had a lot of time in the dirt. What's been the most impactful thing for you in your faith and your biblical walk? Is there been anything that's really impacted you besides just the dirt and finding something that's moved you as you've uncovered?
Well, I've never found in 25 years of work, I've never found anything that was really valuable. I've never found any golden goodies or Ark of the Covenant, Holy Grail, still looking, hasn't come up yet. I pushed on every one of those walls in that stupid tomb, and none of them would open. I've never found anything of extreme value in that way. But at the same time, there have been moments that I suppose would be touches, maybe is one way to describe it, touches with the ancient world. It's really striking when you pull a let's just say a clay pot out of the ground, and it's coming up for the first time. And you look at how that pot was constructed, and you can see from the swirls that it was made on a wheel. And you can tell by a curve in one place, the guy that made this thing on the wheel was using his knuckle. That's how he was shaping this thing. And then he picks it up off of the wheel. And as he does so, he sticks his thumb on it and sets it down. And now here I am digging this pot up, and I pick it up with my hands, and I grab it just like he did. And my thumb finds that indentation on the rim. And I'm thinking, the guy that made this, his hands were just like mine.
Right.
And here I am for the first time, maybe in 2,000 years, touching a jar that's been in the ground. And that's what I mean by, a touch.
Right.
But does that send your faith over the moon? Well, no, but it's special.
Right.
Because it's a way in which we as moderns can relate to the generations that have come before. And, that guy's dead. He's been dead for thousands of years, and yet he was just like me.
Right.
And you wonder, what did he eat? And what did he think? And what did he believe?
Right.
And that sort of imagination game is thrilling.
Humanizing the experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
These are real flesh and blood human beings.
It's not just a story on a page. It's real people experiencing this.
That's cool.
And that's what archaeology does for us. I mean, as a biblical scholar, that's too big of a word.
It's not.
As a Bible guy, we read texts all the time.
Hanging in a bistro,
As Bible guys hanging in a bistro.
Yeah, bro.
Texts all the time, and these texts are the products of humans as well. And God's playing a role. I'm not denying that.
Right.
But these are the products of humans. But they're mental. They're mental constructs.
Okay.
Archaeology touches the physical.
Right.
It reaches into the daily life.
Okay. Good. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. What would you say are some of your favorite archaeological sites in Palestine, Israel, in that area? What are some of the sites that they're really special to you, or that you like to go back to, or take people to experience?
So, some of the special things are sites, to be sure, but let me save that for a moment.
Okay.
Other things that are special are geographical regions. And one of the things we try to do when we do archaeology is contextualize. Just like a Bible guy is going to read the fourth chapter of the Gospel of John and say, well, how does that fourth chapter relate to the fifth chapter or to the third chapter? You want to contextualize a thing. Well, when we excavate sites, we try to contextualize sites as well. And so whole regions become fascinating just in their interplay. And there are regions that are just beautiful from a scenic perspective over there. I can't say there's a place that I enjoy more than the far north of the country.
Okay.
A place called the Hula Basin, or the upper stretches of the River Jordan.
Okay.
It's just gorgeous up there. Mountains around, snow up on the top, and whole constellation of sites underneath that interacted throughout the Old Testament period. So regions are fascinating. Jerusalem, the whole region of Jerusalem is fascinating as well, for different reasons. But these are fascinating regions that I like to return to over and over and again.
Okay.
Sites, oh wow, I don't know. I tell Dan is a site that's way up in the north, in that Hula Basin area that I mentioned a minute ago. I think that's a fascinating site. The huge walls, gates. I dug there one season and got to experience something of the material culture at Dan. That's a way cool kind of place. And then there's some sites in Jordan that are just knockouts. I mean, if you've never been to Petra, everybody's heard of Petra, right? Petra is just a once in a lifetime kind of place to see.
Okay.
Yeah, that's cool too.
That's the one you're talking about that was in that one movie with the archaeologist, right? So.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the band. I'm just kidding.
That's going way back. So I was thinking earlier, Indiana Jones, he had a teaching job too. I mean, even he had to, teach to make a living.
And he went to Petra. Are you Indiana Jones?
No, sir.
You've been called that a few times, I'm sure. You got something else, Ryan? Anything else you want to ask?
Has there been anything recently in archaeology that's really been profound for you, that it's been just anything interesting archaeologically that you think is of high significance?
Well, sure. Again, if we step back and talk about archaeology as illuminating or as illustrating the biblical world, just earlier this year, something came out of the ground way down south, almost to the Red Sea, way down in the south, where it's very dry and all sorts of things are preserved, and they pull from the sediment a piece of wool that is actually been dyed. Right. Purple. Yeah. It was purple. It was a piece of purple wool that I don't know if it was part of a garment or, there's not enough of it there to see. But the fibers could actually be analyzed. They could see that these fibers were dyed with the kind of purple dye that comes from these tiny sea creatures, that makes purple. And you got to squeeze, you got to milk about 50 of those suckers just to get enough to... This is why purple is so important,
Right.
And it was the first bit of purple that has been found. And I mean, it was from the Iron Age, and it's dyed, and it's brilliant in color. And of course, the name purple is applied to the Canaanites. When we talk about the land of Canaan, it's the purple. And when you take a step further down the road, the purple becomes the Punics or the Phoenicians. They were the purple people. And so suddenly now we've got this, for the first time, some purple coming out of the ground. And you think, wow, this gave its name to the entire region, back in the biblical period. And now we've got a piece of it.
It's what the people were known for, is that color. That's cool.
But it had to be in a special area, to be preserved.
Yeah.
Where else would such wool be found? The other thing that just came out, you guys probably have seen it too if you watch Facebook, which is where we get all the news, right?
Yikes.
The news reels and everything, they were bouncing around a Dead Sea Scroll find.
Yeah, we were just talking about that earlier, yeah.
We were talking about that, yeah. This is the first time anybody's found any scraps from the Dead Sea Scroll.
50 years,
material. Yeah, 50 years, 60 years. This stuff has been sort of dried up. Yeah. It's interesting. I have to be very careful, watch my language in front of a New Testament guy. It's written in that abominable Greek.
Greek, yeah. Yeah, part of Nahum, right?
Yeah, some minor prophet stuff. So it's written in Greek. It's a translation. It doesn't align directly with the Septuagint, but it's similar to.
Yeah.
So it raises a lot of really cool questions.
I mean, so many. I mean, and this is where we can kind of geek out a little bit. But there was apparently more than one tradition of this. People were interested in translating this Hebrew text into Greek in at least a couple of different ways. That it's not just this one area down in Egypt where this is happening, but apparently other places or different traditions. It's interesting stuff. So.
Why do you think this work is so important? Why do you think it's so important that so much energy is expended into this? And why, not everyone's a scholar like yourself or Brian here. Why should we care? Why is this so important that this work continues down this path?
Well, I think it's important because it demonstrates to us that the Bible did not simply, drop out of the sky or fall into a vacuum, that it's actually a written document that reflects real life in a real place. And I'm not saying there's no, metaphor or, there's no parables in the Bible, because obviously there are. But, it's not like, Abraham got up one day because his Apple Watch went off, the alarm woke him up. But there are these kinds of details that are in the biblical text that show us what one of my teachers, Brian, you may remember, a guy named Lewis Foster, used to talk all the time about verisimilitude, with the V, verisimilitude, that the biblical text aligns with its time, with its context. Right. And there's great value in seeing that. And it gives us, I think, encouragement in our faith, the reliability of what's being recorded there. So
that's good.
Big stuff there.
Yeah, that is important. It really is. And I think and one of the things we try to talk about is exactly what you're saying. This purple was discovered just a little bit earlier. Just in the last few weeks, we've had this new part of the Dead Sea Scrolls that's been discovered. This is an ongoing thing. This isn't something that happened 50 years ago or 60 years ago. It's something that's happening right now. And I've told Ryan, as techniques evolve, as we get better, even satellites, the fact that we're able to see things now from the sky in a way we never have is giving us new insight into where some things can be found, and just really interesting. That's a live, ongoing discovery. So, Mark, you always tell some interesting stories. One of the things I find interesting is you spent a summer, if I remember this correctly, one of the most famous archaeological sites that was there for a long period of time is Jericho. I completely forgot the name of Jericho. But you spent a summer mapping that, is that right? Like the older digs that had been done and so forth. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was there. Not a whole summer, but I was there for a time. Okay. We mapped the site. I was working with the Palestinian Authority at the time.
Jericho's interesting not only because of the biblical account, but a lot of this archaeology we're talking about, the techniques and things were practiced there, from a very early period of time. Kenyon was there, and from that aspect, probably one of the oldest inhabited cities that we know of in the world, right there. Just very cool things about that. Here's where I was going with all this. I mean, that's a cool story, but you've got all these cool stories, and we've kind of kept you. I know I'm putting you on the spot. What do you think is just kind of a cool story, or something you think somebody would find interesting, as something that you had happen, or something that you did as a part of one of these archaeological expeditions, or nothing like putting you on the spot. Tell me something interesting,
right.
Juicy, that no one else knows.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you a story. It's not going to actually illustrate anything about archaeology per se, but it's a lot of fun. It happened on my very first summer over there. I told you that we were looking for this eye site, right?
Right.
Near Ramallah, and having a hard time finding the things that we were hoping to find. The text describes walls and a gate, and we had no walls and we had no gate. Well, yeah, but everything had slipped down slope, and they could have been there lost. How else can you demonstrate a walled city? Well, the answer is by means of water system. If we could find some kind of a water system, like a water tunnel, that went under the ground.
Oh, right.
Maybe they, would burrow under the wall, bring the water by means of a channel. So you thought, well, perhaps there's a channel somewhere. Can we find the channel? Where do we look for that? Well, it just so happened that down at the base of the hill, right under the site, there was a well. And the shepherds would come and they'd, water their sheep there. And it was, I don't know, maybe 2-3 meters in diameter at the top. And you look down another 2-3 meters, you could see the water black and ominous down there.
Right.
And, the 5 or 6 of us stood there looking down and with it. And the head archaeologist says, I need somebody who knows how to swim, who'll go down there. Oh yeah, that's me. That's all, that's what I want to do. Indiana Jones, right? So I got a big breath, got down to my underwear, and jumped in. And only later did they say, did you see that there were leeches in the water?
Oh my gosh.
Probably wouldn't have done it. I get down in the water, get a big breath, and go down.
Right.
And a feeling, around the side of the well, and there was like a hole. I came up to the top. I said, "There's a hole that goes back towards the hill." They said, "Oh, that's great. Go in it." Okay.
No.
21, 22 years old, dumb as a stump. Anyway, I got a big breath and went down in it. And, went probably a body's length, the length of my body back into it. And it was kept going. I came up and said, "It's still going." "No, go farther. Anyway, they finally got a light. Somebody ran back and got a light, and they said, "Okay, we'll take the light and go in as far as you can, see what you can see." So I got in the hole and bumped my way along, and I'm feeling, ancient stones,
Right.
When was this made? Who knows? And I felt there was an air pocket up above.
Wow.
Oh, that's good. So I came up into the air pocket. The water's like this, and I got my nose, out of the water.
Right.
Under the ground, under, the stone. Come up and get air, and I had the flashlight right by my head, and I turned the light on. And as soon as I turned the light on, it was like this thing was right in my face. And I jumped back, hit my head on the rock.
Oh my.
As it turned out, you know what it was?
What?
It was a 2-liter cola bottle. It was floating on the surface inside this water system. How the heck did that get in there?
That's crazy. I had no idea 2 liters were that old.
Yeah. Plastic, it never dies. Yeah. We got back. I came back out. We excavated that whole length of the channel. We thought, well, let's go down on it from above. We followed it, and it went for, I don't know, 5-10 meters, and then it just petered out and disappeared.
Really?
So it didn't take us anywhere. But it was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
it makes for good stories.
It's a great story.
If you hadn't let the 2-liter scare you, you could have swam right down to the end of it.
I can just imagine a young Mark doing that. Oh. That's the kind of thing you would do. That's great. So
fun times. And my wife married me anyway.
Anyway.
Yeah. Okay, I got a final question here. You've led a lot of trips. What's the number one thing that most people say they're surprised by, or like they didn't expect as you've led them through these trips, like, is there anything like that you hear time and time again as they visit the Holy Land for the first time, you're leading them on this trip that's really surprised them?
Well, I'm going to voice it in my own way, but what I hear often is diversity. They didn't think that the land was that diverse. Right. I say that because most of us have this image of the land of the Bible that comes off of a Christmas card, with the three kings riding across sand dunes. And to see that there's actually many different types of landform there, that there's jungle, there's desert, there's ice, there's snow, there's swamp. The experience of the diversity of the land itself usually shocks a lot of people. And they come back and say, I never thought it looked like that.
Yeah. I think that's true. That was true for me. I mean, our first trip was in January, and, you're like, bring a fleece, bring a rain jacket and that kind of thing. And I remember being in Jerusalem we were on the Mount of Olives, and had my fleece on, had my jacket on. It was cool. It was a cool day. And yeah, it's very surprising. But then, as you travel down, like you said, toward the Dead Sea, down into the Judean wilderness, it's, starts to become hotter, and the altitude drops and the temperature changes. It's just it's a very diverse place. That's well said. So
cool.
Well, Mark, I hope you've enjoyed your visit here. And,
I am still looking for the treats,
Well, we'll see what we can do.
So am I.
I tell you what, if we can get some, maybe you could come back sometime. We'd love to have you back at the bistro another time. So,
well, I'd come back to the bistro even without the donuts. Okay. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for sharing, and just again, appreciate your expertise, appreciate your ability to communicate so well and paint some just beautiful pictures there. I really appreciate that, and it's been a pleasure having you with us today, Mark. So.
Well, thank you. I'll put in the plug, markziese.com. Yeah. You can always find me there and see what we're up to.
Very good. markziese.com. And if you do /stories is your blog, and there's some fascinating stories there in that blog. Very, very much worth reading for sure.
And I think you contributed one.
Yeah, there's one story in there that I put as a part of it. But yeah, it's a lot of interesting stuff. So
sure. Very good.
Well, Ryan, I'll let you take us out.
Yeah. So. Thank you so much, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Well, thanks so much for listening to this episode of Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro. Next Tuesday, Brian and I are going to be talking about worldview. We're going to talk about what it is and why it is so important for our understanding of Scripture and the world. Not only is this topic relevant for understanding the past, it is also relevant for us today as we interpret the world around us. Don't worry if you've never heard the term before. The idea isn't overly technical, and everybody can understand it. So join us for that. In the meantime, you can find show notes, links, and more for this episode and others at thebiblebistro.com. You can also find us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Bible Bistro. And as always, you can subscribe to us on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Just search for Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro. If you're enjoying the podcast and find it helpful, would you also please give us a review on Apple Podcasts? The more positive reviews we receive, the more likely others will be able to find and listen to this content. Also, we're going to be doing a couple giveaways in the next couple of weeks. So if you haven't subscribed on the social media or the newsletter, you should do that now so you get notified as soon as we roll that out. Thanks so much for listening, and we will talk to you next week.